Welcome to How to Hand Feed Hummingbirds Part 2. This is the 5th video in the A Bird in the Hand video series, and in this video you will learn a quick and easy technique to condition your backyard hummingbirds to feed out of your bare hand through an open window of your house. Feeding your hummingbirds from a window in your home is the easiest and quickest way to teach your hummingbirds to hand feed. Mainly because all that they will see of you in the beginning will be your hand sticking out the window beside the feeder. Also, feeding from a window will allow you to enjoy those early morning feeding periods without having to rush around to get dressed and go outside to hand feed them. To put this quick, easy method to use, you will need 5 basic things. Number 1, you will need a window with lace curtains from which to feed the birds. Number 2, you will need a feeder that will attach to your window with suction cups. Number 3, you will need hummingbird food to put in the feeder. Number 4, you will need to attract hummingbirds to your window feeder. And number 5, you will need a quick, easy technique to teach the hummingbirds to feed out of your hand. Your first step will be to choose a window in your home from which to feed the hummingbirds. Choose a window in a room where you spend a considerable amount of time. That will give you ample opportunity to enjoy watching the birds at your feeder, and in turn, you will start to notice at what times during the day they are feeding the most frequently, so you can attempt to hand feed them during these heavy feeding periods. You will also need some type of lace curtains to cover your window. This will allow you to conceal yourself behind the curtains and still be able to see the birds by looking through the patterns in the lace. As the birds become accustomed to feeding at your window and out of your hand, you will quickly be able to open the curtains more and more without scaring away the birds. Next, you will need to buy a window feeder that will attach to your window with a suction cup. There are several types of inexpensive plastic feeders that you can find in most of your larger stores that sell bird feeders. To fill your feeder, you can either buy powdered food that you add to water according to the directions on the package, or you can easily make your own hummingbird food by adding 1 part white sugar to 4 parts water. Stir in the sugar as you slowly bring the mixture to a boil. Boil 2 minutes and let cool before using. Add some nectar to your feeder and you will be ready to mount it to your window. You will want to mount the feeder so that when you open the window and stick your hand out through the opening, you will be able to get your hand as close to the feeder as possible. My window is the type that slides open from the side, so I will mount my feeder as close to the bottom and side edge as possible. If you have a window that slides up from the bottom, just mount your feeder somewhere along the bottom edge so that you'll be able to stick your hand out just under your feeder. Now you have to wait for the hummingbirds to find your feeder. If you want to help the hummingbirds find your feeder, I suggest that you place a few flowering plants near your window feeder. This will provide more color to help attract any hummingbirds that might be passing through your area. An easy way to do this is to just hang a basket of some of their favorite flowers near your feeder. A basket of red fuchsias or red petunias has worked well for me, or you can place pots of their favorite flowers below your feeder. Pots of red salvia are my favorite flowers to attract hummingbirds to my window feeder. Once you have some hummingbirds using your feeder on a regular basis, you can apply the easy technique that will quickly teach them to feed out of your bare hand. To teach your hummingbirds to hand feed, you will first teach them to feed out of a spoon that you will attach to your feeder. Then you will teach them to feed out of the spoon as you hold the spoon in your hand. And finally, you will pour the nectar from the spoon into your hand and teach them to feed out of your bare hand. Your first step will be to attach a spoon to the feeder. You will place a piece of duct tape on the bottom of the spoon and then attach the spoon to the bottom of the feeder. A measuring spoon makes the ideal spoon to use. They are light in weight and have a short handle that makes them easy to attach to the feeder. Add some nectar to the spoon, and to make sure that the hummingbirds have to feed out of the spoon, plug the holes in the feeder with small twigs or take out the yellow flowers and put tape over the holes in the feeder. Now just wait for the hummingbirds to make several trips to your feeder until they get used to feeding out of the spoon. At first they will try to feed out of the feeder, but eventually they will give up and begin to feed out of the spoon. During the filming of this video, I had 3 different hummingbirds using my feeder, 2 females and 1 young male hummingbird. My hummingbird seems to be determined to try and feed out of the feeder and doesn't seem to even notice the nectar in the spoon. The nectar in the spoon, like the nectar in the feeder, is some that I made so it doesn't contain any red food coloring to make it more noticeable to the hummingbirds. To help end her frustration and try to get her to use the spoon, I decided to add some store-bought nectar that contains a little red food coloring to hopefully finally get her attention. Just adding that little bit of red coloring seemed to be just enough to do the trick. It wasn't long before the young male hummingbird was also feeding out of the spoon. Now that your hummingbird is used to feeding out of the spoon, it's time to move to step 2, which will be to stick your hand out the window and let the hummingbird get used to seeing it near the feeder. Pull the curtains up and over your arms so that you will still be concealed behind the curtain. My hummingbird checked my hand out a couple times, but didn't seem to be overly concerned. A couple trips to your feeder should be all it takes for your hummingbird to get used to the presence of your hand. Now you can move on to step 3, which will be to place the spoon in your hand and let your birds get used to feeding out of the spoon while you hold it in your hand. Once again, pull the curtain up and over your arms so that only your hand can be seen by the hummingbird. My hummingbird returns and sees the spoon but tries to feed her one more time. Once the hummingbird sees it can't get any more nectar out of the feeder, it's ready to take a closer look at the spoon in my hand. A couple more close looks and the hummingbird is ready to feed out of the spoon. Another trick you can use to attract hummingbirds to your spoon is to take the yellow plastic flower out of the feeder, cover the hole in the feeder with tape, and put the flower in your spoon. This is especially helpful if you don't want to use nectar that contains the red dye to help attract them to the spoon. After a half dozen visits or so, the hummingbirds will be at ease feeding out of the spoon in your hand. Then you can begin to open the curtains so you can have a better view. They may hesitate the first visit or so to your hand, but soon they'll be used to seeing your face in the window. Now that the hummingbirds are used to feeding out of the spoon in your hand, it's time for the final step. You will pour the nectar out of the spoon into the palm of your hand. You will have to hold your hand fairly flat so the nectar doesn't run out of the creases in your hand. As before, the hummingbirds might hesitate a little bit at first, but soon you will be enjoying the thrill of hand feeding hummingbirds right out of your bare hand. Once the birds are trained, anyone you choose, such as family or friends, can take your place at the window and immediately enjoy the thrills of hand feeding your hummingbirds also. That just about wraps up this tape on hand feeding hummingbirds. By watching this tape and putting to use the quick, easy method described in the tape, In just a very short time, you will be enjoying all the thrills and excitement of hand feeding your own backyard hummingbirds.